When I first got my job at Amazon as a software engineer nearly a decade ago now, I remember knowing very, very little about AWS. And this was a really anxiety-inducing thing for me. I thought that if I didn't know anything about this, I would fail at my job, I wouldn't be able to succeed, and everyone would laugh at me. And I remember when I first got my offer letter from Amazon, I tried to learn as much as I could about AWS. And I distinctly remember trying to go through all the different resources online, including the AWS website and YouTube, and just getting completely overwhelmed with all of the details. At that time, there wasn't a lot of good content, but even now, it's still very overwhelming for people to figure out what do they need to know, what can they ignore, and what will they figure out later as they go along. And what I want to do in this video is create for you a guide that I wish I had 10 years ago. And I want to include things that I think personally that you need to know if you're trying to learn AWS, or maybe you're starting a new job that's going to leverage AWS. And so this video is going to walk you through all of those details. We're going to start pretty high level with just some prerequisites. Then we're going to dive into some of the different services that you're going to want to know, just introductory stuff, some of the goals that you should have as you go along. And then I'm also going to give you a ton of resources along the way. So links to certain things that you can come to this page, this mind map that I'm going to show you in a moment here. It's going to have embedded links so you can click on this stuff and go directly to the page. You're going to have all the resources right in front of you. And then I'm also going to give you a framework for how I think you should go about building your real skills for AWS. Because, reading documentation, watching YouTube videos is one thing, but actually building and gaining the confidence to build on your own is a completely different thing. So I'm going to give you a framework that I think is the best way, in my personal opinion, to learn AWS. And then at the end, I'm going to give you some extra resources and extra tips that I wish I had if I was starting from scratch. So that's the agenda for this video. So let's start from scratch. And the first thing that I want to talk about is just some of the prerequisites that I think that you should have when you are starting to learn AWS. And just as an FYI, I'm going to put a link to this mind map in the description section of this video down below. So you'll be able to visit this mind map and check out all the resources. There's going to be hyperlinks in a lot of the different sections that we cover. So this can really be a resource for you that you keep as kind of a map of how you should approach things. And so that'll be available for you down below. All right, so let's get right into it. The first thing that I want to talk about is learning the basics, like the basic fundamentals of AWS. But before we even get to AWS specifically, there are a couple things that you need to know about, some prerequisites, if you will, that you should kind of have under your belt so that when you hit the AWS stuff, you're not going to be like overwhelmed with just some basic things that you don't really know about. So that's what I want to talk about here in the suggested prerequisite section. So let's expand this section out. So the first thing that I think is imperative is just some basic networking fundamentals. And there's a really good video that I came across. It's how the internet works. And it basically describes to you, like, when you put in a website address in the URL of your browser, what happens? How does the internet know kind of where to find the resources? How does that HTML and JavaScript, all that good stuff get sent back to you? So this is a really quick video by Academind, I think is the YouTube channel, that walks through those processes. But you should also know like a little bit about networking stuff like IP addresses. You don't really need to know too much about subnets or anything like that, just basically how the internet works in general. The next thing that you should know about is operating systems and virtual machines, more specifically Linux in general, because Linux is kind of the OS of choice in AWS and in the cloud. So you should know about that, and you should know about just like the concept of virtual machines. There's a bunch of great resources out there for this, so I'm not going to bore you with that. The next thing that you should know about is just some command line basics. And I'm not talking about like complicated, sed or grep stuff. Like, you don't really need to go into too much detail, but just know how to navigate the terminal, how to switch directories, how to create files, how to view files, how to delete things, move things around. It's just very basic fundamental stuff, because you're going to find that occasionally you're going to need to like SSH or connect to a box, connect to a machine. And so if you don't know how this works, when the time comes that you have to do that, you're going to be like, what is this stuff? And you have to go down a path of learning that specific thing. And then that's going to sidetrack you from actually learning the thing that you want to learn, which is AWS. And this one, programming language. So this one is a little bit debatable, and it really depends on what you're focusing on. So certain kind of parts of AWS, you don't necessarily need to know a programming language. So say, for example, if you're like a cloud support engineer, or maybe even a DevOps person, but it depends on the DevOps person, then you're not necessarily going to need to know a programming language, but I do highly suggest that you have at least one under your belt. And in terms of the one that I suggest, this again is very debatable. I suggest Python. And the reason is, well, there's two reasons. It's pretty easy to learn in the sense that it's a dynamically typed language. It's not very verbose. So it's kind of straightforward. You're going to learn a lot about the constructs like for loops, if statements, all that stuff. Very beginner friendly. And it's also applicable to many, many different domains. Like you can build a full backend for a web application using Python. You can also use it for, it's very widely used in data processing. So if you want to be like a BI engineer or like a data engineer, for example, Python's a great language to know. Also very applicable for data scientists too. They do a lot of data manipulation and training of their ML models using Python. So overall, it's a good starting point if you don't already have a programming language under your belt. If you already know a programming language, don't bother with learning Python, but this is just a suggestion that I wanted to give. And the last prerequisite that I wanted to share, and please don't skip this. There's way too many people that skip this and it ends up biting them either through a surprise bill or other problems. I created a video, which is a new AWS account checklist. And there's about 5 different things that you need to do to secure your AWS account and prevent like some mistakes from happening. Don't be like one of those people that you see on Reddit or the internet that have like a $20,000 bill or something. I've been that person at one point, not $20,000 of course, but a small amount, but still no one wants to pay for things that you didn't intend to pay for. So just follow these steps. You're going to secure your account. You're going to ensure that you understand the free tier, things like that. And it's going to help you out in the long run. Okay, so that is it for the prerequisites or the things that you need to know before you get into AWS. So let's move on now to some of the fundamental AWS concepts that I think you need to know about. And this is just kind of like an introduction phase. You're not going too deep into the services, like understanding all the details and the specifics. It's just to kind of get your feet wet to understand the lay of the land, so to speak. And so let's walk through this. So the first thing to understand is the global AWS infrastructure. So like, what does it mean to be on AWS, to be in the cloud? And there's 2 kind of subfields or subtopics to understand. They're pretty simple. So the first one is regions and the other one is availability zones. Regions are just kind of geographic areas that have multiple different data centers within them, isolated data centers. And then availability zones are instances of those data centers. So they're areas where you deploy your infrastructure to, and typically we deploy our infrastructure to multiple different availability zones so that we can achieve higher levels of availability. So just understand these concepts. So there is a link right here that links to the AWS documentation that talks about these 2 things, just briefly, but it's going to basically reiterate what I just told you now. So yeah, understand global AWS infrastructure and just what AWS has to offer from a service perspective. Now, the other topic is, now we're starting to get into the meat and potatoes of this, which is the AWS services that I think that you should know about if you're a beginner. And the way this works is that there's like 250 AWS services and no one knows them all. I don't know them all. I probably know like, I don't know, maybe 50 of them or so, but they're the important 50. And depending on what your specialization is, like if you're a data scientist, you're going to know a certain set of services. If you're a full stack engineer, you're going to know a different set of services. But there is kind of this common ground that no matter what your specialization is, you're probably going to be working with this service. So that's what I wanted to cover here for the services section. And again, the intention here is not to go too deep into these services, just understand what they are, what they do, and generally how they work and what they offer. So there's a couple different categories that I have for you here. So the first one is for networking, and this is just networking fundamentals. So this is for VPC or virtual private cloud. And the VPC is basically a logical isolation of all of your resources in AWS. And your VPC is just for your account. My VPC is just for my account. And the way AWS works is, unless there's explicit permission between these 2 VPCs, we can't talk to each other. So it's an isolated kind of area within AWS that you have access to and that you can protect your private resources, for example. So this is a link to another good video by Kataman where he walks through VPCs. I really like that guy's channel, by the way. So make sure you just kind of understand what a VPC is, why it's important, how it works, maybe do a little bit of understanding of like IP address and subnets at this point. But if you don't get it, don't worry about it, because by default in your AWS account, you do get a VPC for free. Although you may run into some problems if you don't understand. Security groups in particular tend to bite people the most when they're learning. So probably you want to learn about security groups. I do have a video of this, of security groups in particular, on my AWS channel. I didn't link it here, but if you just type security groups, you should be able to find it. Okay, so now let's talk about compute. And for compute, pretty straightforward, EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud. This is just the idea that you're renting servers from AWS. That's all it is. And you can kind of rent a server and use it as you want and then give it back when you're done. And AWS maintains that server for you. And you can do whatever you want on it. You can install, I don't know, Grafana. You can install like an RDS database, like a Postgres database. You can like mine Bitcoin, although I think that's against the terms of service, so you probably don't want to do that. But just know what EC2 is. Maybe as part of your learning, you want to just boot up a T2 Micro, which is part of the free tier, so you can do that for free. And just play with it, SSH into it, maybe install something, update some packages, see how it works, yada, yada, yada. It's good to know just kind of how it works. And it's good to know a little bit about EC2s because you're probably going to cross them at some point in your career. The next thing is in terms of storage. And this one is a big one. S3 is used all over the place. So no matter what your domain is, S3 is kind of like the bread and butter of AWS. It's also like one of the first services, if not the first service. I'm blanking. It's either S3, SNS, SQS, or EC2. Someone correct me in the comments if you know. And by the way, if you haven't already, go and like this video because I'm sure there's a lot of people that can benefit from this. And if you like it, it really helps out the channel and helps get this to more eyes. So I would really appreciate if you do that. So anyways, learn about S3, and S3 is actually very easy to use. It's just like a file store. So you can go to the AWS console, you can upload a file, you can download that file. At this point, I would just do that and understand basically how it works. You don't really need to know too much more. And then next, in terms of databases, so this is a prickly one. So there's two that I put here because I think they're equally important. So there's RDS, which is kind of like the classic database that most people kind of think of when you say database. So you're writing SQL to interact with your data sets. And that's a service in AWS. It's called Relational Database Service, like I have in front of you here. And so you can launch Postgres, Microsoft SQL Server. There's also a variant of RDS called Aurora, which is kind of an in-house generated database engine that's built by Amazon, or AWS rather. And so just know about what RDS is and kind of some basics of it. I already told you a little bit, but you may want to read a bit more. And then in terms of DynamoDB is another really popular AWS service. It's used extensively. It's a document store, so similar to MongoDB. And it's also a NoSQL type database, so it's very good for key value lookups. And yeah, just know a little bit about Dynamo. It is a little bit prickly because there's a lot to know about DynamoDB, but just know that it's a document store. It's good for key value stuff. It's high performance, high scale, high availability, and like 90% of AWS and Amazon is backed or is hosted on DynamoDB. Don't quote me on that. I don't know the actual number. I just know that a lot of services that we use, if not most of them, use DynamoDB. So in terms of a resource for this, I have a comparison video between RDS and DynamoDB. Instead of giving you like an RDS video and then a DynamoDB video, then you trying to piece them together, just go watch this video. I introduce you to both of them. It's like 30 minutes or something, but it's worth it. And you're able to understand very easily kind of what these things do. Oh, I think I forgot to talk about this one. So this is also one of my videos for S3 under the storage section. It's just a core concepts for S3. It gives you a brief introduction. So you should probably watch that one too. Now, in terms of security, also very, very good to know, which is IAM, or Identity and Access Management. This is an extremely important concept and service to understand because IAM governs permissions, and in AWS, permissions are everywhere. You need to have explicit permissions to access things. You can deny permissions to certain people, and IAM is the system that allows you to do that. In fact, even the account that you register for in AWS, it's in the IAM section. So you have an IAM user. So knowing how to get the credentials or the keys for your account so that you can use the AWS CLI, that's going to be in IAM. So you should know about how that works. And I have a video of this where I walk through these key concepts. So the concept of users, roles, groups, keys and credentials, user logins, all that kind of stuff. So you can watch this video and understand it end to end, and you should be good to go at that point. Okay, I want to address the elephant in the room here for the fundamentals of AWS concepts. And some of you may be wondering this, and I want to just tackle it head on. And so the elephant in the room is this. Should you do your AWS certification if you are trying to learn AWS fundamentals? Now, I am of the personal opinion that this is not necessary. But for some of you that need a very structured approach to learning, this may be a good thing to do. Personally, I never did the AWS certification. I learned by doing, and over 10 years, I don't know many people like internally at Amazon that actually are AWS certified. We learn by doing, and you'll see later that is the best way, in my opinion, to learn AWS. So do you need a certification? No. Will it benefit you? Maybe. It depends on kind of your position and whether or not you have the will to study for something and then pay, I think it's like $100 or something per exam. But one thing to do is don't be that guy or girl that does your AWS certification and you don't really have any practical experience after. Like you think you're an expert. Like you're not really going to be confident with AWS until you get your hands dirty and build. So if you want to do your certification, go ahead, but just make sure you follow it up with actual practical projects, which is actually one of the follow-up sections that we're going to talk about here. But if you do decide to do your certification, then there's probably two that you should do. So you should start with the AWS Cloud Practitioner, which is just like very, very basic. What is the cloud kind of thing? You learn some of these services that we talked about here, but no hands-on stuff. It's just kind of pure theory and kind of why AWS is good kind of thing. And then the Solutions Architect Associate is a little bit more in detail. So you learn about how to actually build things, how services are connected, that kind of stuff. So more applicable, more practical, and kind of more useful. So if you do go down this path, I would tackle both of these, and I have the links to them below. And if you really want, like maybe you can't afford it or you live in a less privileged country, I would just kind of read all the different items in these different curriculums for these two exams, and then go ahead and try and learn them. So yeah, that's the elephant in the room. So the TLDR is maybe you should do your certification. It depends, but at the end of the day, you should always do practical projects, which is actually the topic for the next section. So let's jump into it. So we're going to go to the build your skills section. And this is really where you're going to kind of hone your skills. You've learned in the previous section, hopefully at this point, you learned about some of the key AWS services that are at your disposal. You kind of have a lay of the land. Maybe you've messed in the console for a little while. You're comfortable. You know what's what, and you're ready to actually do something interesting now. And like I was mentioning, we were talking about the certification. The best way, hands down, I don't care what anyone says, to learn AWS is through hands-on projects. The skills that you develop, the time that you spend trying to debug things when they're not working is extremely, extremely valuable. That's how knowledge is gained. It's not learned by just watching YouTube videos or watching other people do it. It's by getting into the weeds and doing it yourself. And in order to do that, you need to have well-structured projects for you to accomplish something. And so that's what building your skills is all about, gaining the confidence to actually be able to do things on your own. So what the goal is here is to do a project. And so what are the different resources? Like, how am I going to know how to do a project? Like, I'm not a genius. I can't just think of an idea like, oh, I want to build Twitter. Well, where do I start? How do I know that, right? So you need to start small. Like, don't try and create the world or create heaven and earth and kind of accomplish a massive thing. You need to start with like tiny incremental projects that kind of get your feet wet and then expand your knowledge base out so that you can start layering on more services and more options so that you can gain that incremental knowledge. In the beginning, it's kind of going to suck because you need to learn about a bunch of different things at once. But once you have that fundamental base down, then everything else comes naturally. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can do certain projects. And so the first one that I want to talk about is through YouTube, because of course, YouTube is free. If you're watching this video right now, thank you. And so some project ideas that I have in terms of YouTube are right here. So the first one is people typically start with this, by the way, which is website hosting. So you can do this first one, which is these first four are my videos from my YouTube channel, and I'll talk about them briefly here. So WordPress website hosting. Everyone knows what WordPress is. It's a blog, right? You can go to my website, beabetterdev.com. This video that I created was based on the things that I learned when I built that website. So if you like how that looks and you're like, hey, I want to do something similar, just go and watch this video. It's WordPress. It's pretty straightforward. And for those of you that are maybe kind of older, or you know about like other hosting providers like DigitalOcean and stuff, the technology that you use here is AWS Lightsail, and that is the closest thing to like DigitalOcean. It's kind of stupid proof in the sense that it makes it easy to set all this stuff up without having to know all the complexity of AWS. So you're kind of shielded from all the details, but you also get a really good product at the end of the day that's scalable and elastic, and you have something to show on your portfolio. The other option is to use for static website hosting if you want to like build a React app, for example, and have like a single page application. This is another one of my AWS videos. It's about like 25 or 30 minutes where I show you how to create a website, static website, using Amazon S3, CloudFront. I think we use IAM in there. There's a bunch of different services that we use, but at the end of the day, you get a React app that like a starting point for you to create. So you can do with that what you will. Now, getting into a little bit more complicated projects. So this one is particularly interesting. I had a lot of fun creating this. So I wanted to create a serverless web crawler. This is a classic, by the way, system design interview question where, you get into a room, someone asks you, how would you build a serverless web crawler that's going to crawl the internet? Or how would you build Google? How would you build the PageRank algorithm? Something like that. And so what I wanted to do is kind of something similar with that. So in this video, serverless web crawler, it's a 3-part series. This is a link to the playlist, but I show you how to build that out, how to design it from the beginning, how to implement it, and then a demonstration of it. So this should probably be like a paid course or something, but I just had fun doing it. And I think you can learn a lot. You see a lot of my thought process too. So this is a really good really good video for you to learn about how to build something and how to design something that will actually scale using some very common AWS services. I think I use DynamoDB here and Lambda predominantly, and SQS is the third service. Okay, and then this one, inventory stock notifier. So this was like during COVID when everyone was trying to buy webcams. I'm not using the webcam right now that I bought using the thing I built here, but I was trying to buy a webcam, and like everyone was buying webcams when COVID came, and you couldn't buy one. So I was like, okay, I need one for work. So I built a tool that would basically scrape the website of a retailer and figure out when it comes in stock, and then send me a text notification to my phone. And then I would just go on the website and buy it. And it actually worked. It worked in like a day. So it may be a little bit out of date now. It's an older video and the quality probably isn't that great, but still there's a lot to learn. Now, another good YouTube resource are Adrian Cantrell's mini project videos. He has a lot of this stuff. They are free and they're pretty good quality. You can check those out as well. He covers a lot of different areas. I like that guy's stuff. He does some good work. Now, if YouTube isn't for you, or you want something a little bit more structured, then you can start moving into the paid content section. And so there's a bunch of different resources that you can use, but I'm going to give you 2 here. And this is a shameless plug to my own course here that was designed for the specific purpose of helping people learn and build on AWS through a practical project. And it's called the AWS Learning Accelerator. And in this course, you use some of the most fundamental AWS services that we just talked about right here. So you use Lambda instead of EC2, you use S3, you use DynamoDB, you use IAM, you use API Gateway, you use SNS. These are like the bread and butters. And so I created this course to specifically tackle the problem of people that are trying to learn AWS, or maybe they did their certification, but they're not yet feeling confident and looking for a guided hands-on project that's going to show you how to, here's a problem that we want to solve. Here is a bunch of different services that we can use to solve that problem. Here are the ones that we are going to use. Here's the design, and now let's go and do it. And it's kind of a walkthrough end to end. And so you can check that out. And I did create a promotional code for you guys. So You can use this link. So the first 50 people that sign up with the course get 15% off. It costs right now $65, which I think is pretty reasonable given the content. I spent probably like hundreds of hours on this thing, kind of thinking it up, designing it, building it. So I'd appreciate if you at the minimum could check it out. On the website, there's a course trailer too, so you can see what it's all about. But use the coupon code LearnAWS now to redeem it. If you have a problem, just email me. It's daniel@beabetterdev.com, and I can help you out. And the other one is by Neil Davis, Digital Cloud Training. He's got a YouTube channel as well. This is a subscription model, so you pay by the month, but he's also got some excellent labs. I remember even when I was trying to learn AWS back in the day, I watched a bunch of his videos. He's a really good teacher and just a good guy in general. I've met him before, so go and check out his stuff. He may provide a coupon code, which I will put in the description section of this video if he does. I emailed him, but he hasn't gotten back to me yet. But if he does, I'll put it down below. If not, sorry guys. Quick update on this, guys. Neil just got back to me and provided a 15% discount coupon for his Solution Architect Associate training package. I've gone ahead and updated this mind map with the details of it. So you can go ahead and find the link to the mind map, and the discount code is embedded as a hyperlink in this section. And then if you are looking for other project ideas, you can go to this link here, which is, I created a PDF. It's got 5 different project ideas. There's like a CI/CD pipeline. There's an event orchestration. There's building an HTTP API. There's 5 different of them there. It's absolutely free. You just have to sign up for my like newsletter thing and confirm your email. The newsletter, that's something I want to come back to later, which is also useful. But that's something, if you want to be a little bit more self-guided and you just want some ideas for projects, you can go and check that out as well. And then last is AWS workshops. Now, I'm a little bit mixed on this. I put this here just because it's a common resource that people refer to when they're suggesting like how to get project ideas and all that. But the problem with AWS workshops, if you go to this website, it's not in the content itself, it's the way the website is structured. So like at the top banner, at least how it exists today when I checked it out, it requires you to pick the services that you want to use. But if you are trying to build a project and you don't know much about AWS, how do you know what services you want to use? So if you know that stuff in advance, then great, you can come here and click the ones and filter it down. But if you don't, then you're kind of out of luck. So if you work for AWS and you know someone that manages this website, please tell them to fix it, because I just don't think it's a good approach. But you know, that's neither here nor there. Okay, so at this point, you probably have done a project, or you're thinking about doing a project. Maybe you built a website, you got something for your portfolio. Hopefully you're feeling good about kind of the services that are at play, some of the concepts. You're kind of looking for the next steps. You're trying to build and enhance your skill set. So that's where the next step comes in for those of you that are starting to get to the next level. And that's where it comes to studying AWS architectures. And this is a strategy that I used extensively, even to this day, just out of sheer curiosity. I go and learn about what other people build on AWS. I go and read design documents for AWS services. I attend kind of design reviews for things that are completely outside of my domain, just so I can see like what are other people doing and how does it work and what's their thought process. And sometimes it's a completely different problem domain that I have zero experience in, but I learn a lot by just being there and getting exposed to that different information and different thinkers. And maybe there's a different perspective that I never thought of before, a different specialization that I didn't have background in. So studying different AWS architectures and participating in reviews is extremely valuable. So a couple of resources that are at your disposal for this. So this one is key. So AWS reference architecture. So this is a link that you can go to. It's provided by AWS, and there's hundreds of reference architectures that exist on this website. These are real designs for real problems. They are built, I don't think the diagrams themselves are built by companies, but an AWS person puts them together. So like companies like 3M, for example, or IBM, or I don't know, like Motorola, whatever. I'm just spitting out random names now. But they use AWS, and AWS works with them to understand how they're using it, and they put together these really great architecture diagrams for you. And they lay out kind of how it works, how things are connected, and it gives you a lot of background in terms of how they're solving their problems. So seeing different perspectives is key here. So that's what this is all about. So you can go check out this link. You can also filter based on domains. So if you want to do like analytics services or database services or event orchestration or something else, then you can go and do that. and some sub-resources here. So I have a bunch of different videos where I go through different architectures that I found interesting that and talk about them. Like, oh, this is interesting. Why did they do that? Or look at how this is connected. That's an interesting choice. Here's why I think they did that. Probably for scale or availability or something else. So there's about like 7 or 8 videos here that you can watch on my YouTube channel. And this is a link to the playlist right here. And you can check that out to get my commentary on them. Now, AWS also has their own explanation of these diagrams via blog posts. So if you're a reader and you want the quality from AWS curated resources or curated blog posts, you can go ahead and just read that. And then in addition, there's third-party architecture discussions on AWS's YouTube channel. So they have a YouTube channel themselves, and they have clients that come from, IBM, Motorola, wherever, and they're right there blackboarding with an AWS person. The AWS person is asking them questions, and the person is kind of going through their architecture and describing what they did and why. The only problem with this is that on the AWS YouTube channel, it's hard to find these videos. They look a certain way in terms of the thumbnail, but I just went to their YouTube and there's no playlist for this. So you're going to kind of have to scroll and try to find them. Again, if you work for AWS, please tell someone to fix this because it would help everyone a lot. But yeah, so that's it for studying AWS architecture. So next, well, before we get into next, now you're starting to get into kind of more confidence, right? You're reading other AWS architectures, you're seeing the types of problems that people are solving. Maybe they're completely different to you. Maybe they're similar to you, but they used a different approach or a different service. One thing that I want to add here is that something that you'll find as you learn is that there's many ways to skin a cat. And there's many ways to build a solution for a particular problem. And there's also many different services that are offered by AWS that do very similar things and can be used. So this is where people get tripped up because there's many different ways to do the same thing and they get overwhelmed. So studying different AWS architectures will give you that background. So you can say oh, there's EC2, I can use that to host my API. Oh, there's also a Lambda function. Maybe I should use that. Or what's the difference? Why did that team use it? So these are the types of questions that should come up in your mind as you're going through this stuff. Like, what are the different services that do something similar to what I'm trying to do? And then go and read about it. Go and learn. Watch a X versus Y video. I have a bunch of those on my channel, like EC2 versus Lambda versus ECS. Notorious question. People always ask, why should I use one or the other? There's a video on that. So go and learn about that stuff. And that's where people get confused the most. So spend some time trying to understand the difference between the services. Okay, so moving on now to the next. As I said, you're gaining your knowledge, you're gaining insight, and now you're ready to move on. And so this is really where it comes down to you. And this is all about creating your own project ideas. So you've learned about what other people are doing. Hopefully you drew some inspiration from it. Maybe it's something similar to your problem area. Maybe it's not, but you want to try something new. And so think about something. Think about like a product that exists out in the world, like Twitter, like Facebook, like Google, like serverless web crawler, like, I don't know, anything, like different types of problems, right? And you be creative here, and you're reading about other people's solutions to problems. So maybe you can try and emulate that and create a little prototype that doesn't need to scale and work at the capacity that it does at these companies, but at least you're able to be creative here. And this is also where personalization starts to come in. Now, depending on your specialization area, like if you're a full stack engineer, then the projects that you pick here are going to be in that domain. If you're an ML scientist, then obviously the projects are going to use something like AWS SageMaker. So being able to come up with project ideas that are related to your domain that are something that are interesting to you, I think is key. And so a bunch of different tips here or different project ideas that I just came up with. So if you're a full stack engineer, build a Twitter clone. Doesn't need to work perfectly. Who cares? Figure it out. I mean, it doesn't need to be super sophisticated. Use React, use S3, use something for your APIs. It's a full stack app. You'll get a lot of great experience and you'll have some cool stuff on your portfolio if you complete a bunch of these. If you're like a data engineer or maybe even a BI engineer, learn how to build a data ingestion and processing pipeline. Maybe you can get like a feed of RSS newsletter subscriptions or newsletters, something like that. build a pipeline that consumes those notifications, maybe like a web scraper, for example, like persistently scrape a website and push those into AWS and then process them, for example. Another great idea. If you're into like the DevOps side of things, these two projects are great. So anomaly detection dashboard. So maybe you have like a metric that you're trying to identify when it comes out of a certain band. So build a dashboard using Amazon CloudWatch that can monitor for that. Another good idea. The last one is a CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous deployment. Regardless of who you are, you're probably going to want a CI/CD pipeline. Again, I have a video on this. I didn't link it here, but you can check it on my channel. Just type in CI or CD. It should pop up. But another great skill to have under your tool belt is knowing about CI/CD pipelines. So at this point, you should be pretty confident. Like you may struggle a little bit of which service to use. And again, like that course that I built, the AWS Learning Accelerator, does that. It talks about kind of how these different services compare and which ones are useful, which ones I considered, which ones I threw out because of X reasons. So again, I'm just going to plug that. But at this point, you should be able to come up with these ideas and like put together a solution. It may not be the most beautiful thing, but at least you're going to have something to put on your resume if you don't have any cloud experience. And the idea with this is that after you create your own project ideas, you basically go in a loop, right? You go back, you do the project, you learn about new things, you watch new content that's related to it. Then you read more documentation about stuff that uses those services, understand how they actually use it. And then once you do that, you come up with new project ideas. So this is a flywheel. You're constantly going in a circle where you start a project, learn about it, create an idea, start from scratch. And this, my friends, is how you get good at AWS. It's by building hands-on in the cloud, in the console, and solving real life problems. You're not going to learn by, watching this video, but it's not meant to teach you these things, but it's meant to give you a framework for how to think. And this is what I wish I had 10 years ago when I started. If I had this, I feel like I would have been much more successful. And these are the lessons that I wish someone told me. So, do with that as you wish. Now, I did also want to give you some extra tips at the end here because there are some things that I think are useful to know about here to enhance your skills a little bit more. The first one is to join a community and read and ask questions. I find this is especially true if you just don't know anyone and you want to gain more knowledge and gain more experience. The best way to learn is by reading what other people are doing, kind of similar in terms of the reading this one here, the studying AWS architectures. But there's some suggestions here. So the one that I use personally a lot is the AWS subreddit. So reddit.com/r/AWS. This has people from like all over the world. A lot of them work at Amazon, including myself. So you're going to get some really high quality eyes on stuff. So there's news announcements here too. This is how I stay current personally. Like I come here maybe once a day, check things out. People ask interesting questions. Sometimes I give my feedback. Very, very good subreddit to be a part of. The other one is AWS just announced like a version of Stack Overflow that's called a repost. And they also have some like social side of it. So like there's questions and answers that people ask and get answers to. I believe this is a replacement to their forums that they had previously, but don't hold me to that. But it's also a good resource as well. So again, these are two links. You can just click this and go directly to the website. Okay, next, newsletters. Newsletters are great because they come directly to your inbox and you don't need to like seek stuff out. It comes to you. So two suggestions here. Again, a shameless plug. So I have a kind of relatively infrequent. I try to do it bi-weekly, but sometimes it's like once a month. So here's a link to it. It's my newsletter where I talk about like different relevant AWS updates, like news announcements, things that I think you should know about. I also capture all the videos that I come up with and give you like a brief description of them so you can find all that stuff in one place. So I'd appreciate it if you can subscribe to it. It means a lot to me. And again, it helps grow the channel. The other one that I'm subscribed to that I highly suggest is Last Week in AWS by Corey Quinn. This guy's, he's a funny guy. He's a little bit sassy. If you like a little bit of spice in your, and satire rather, well, spice and satire in your dialogue of AWS, then this is the newsletter for you. He gives you a lot of interesting perspectives on AWS. And this guy no holds barred. He goes pedal to the metal. He'll grill AWS. He doesn't work for AWS too, so it's a good thing. He can say whatever he wants. So that's a good one too. Both are links to the respective newsletters, so check that out. And the next one that I have for you here, this one is also extremely valuable. And this is more for more advanced folks, like 300, 400 series level, if you're used to like the certifications world. And even if you're not, I think there's a lot to learn here. So it's called the AWS Builders Library. And this is a website that has different articles that are written by principal engineers and above that work at Amazon, where they talk about some very interesting and relevant distributed systems and cloud problems. So things like retry policies, things like backoff and jitter, things like consensus protocols and replication. These are more advanced concepts that you may not know in the beginning, but if you get to the more advanced levels, these are things that you may learn about or be curious about, and really, really high quality stuff, high quality articles, lots of pictures as well to explain to you how things work. I read this all the time. I can't say more good things about it. So kudos to the people that are putting these articles together because it really helps the community. And this last tip that I have for you here is 100% the most important in this entire video, and it's don't give up. And I wanted to put this because I think that a lot of people feel really frustrated when they're trying to learn AWS. There's just a lot thrown at them and they don't really have a community or don't really have people to ask questions. They get frustrated. They think that they can't do it and they get imposter syndrome. Like, I'm never going to be able to do this. I don't know how to do this. I'm never going to be able to figure it out. Guess what? That was me 10 years ago. And look where I am now. I'm a senior engineer at Amazon. I've built dozens of AWS services that scale to hundreds of thousands of requests per second. So if I can do it, then you can do it too. And just have some grit. Make sure that you can kind of beat through the barriers, beat through the down times, and really embrace the good times too. Because what is life without celebrating the good times and learning from the bad? So I hope you learned something from this video. And again, I'll put this mind map in the description section so you can come to here and click all the links. And again, if you like this stuff, like the video, like the channel, subscribe, do all the YouTube juice stuff. It really helps me out. And again, thanks so much for watching. I hope that you have a really great cloud journey and this was helpful. And yeah, I'll see you next time.